Hey, if you've been following Edgar Cayce narratives for a while, it's good to have you back. And if this is your first time here, you're in the right place because this channel explores real human patterns through clear, grounded storytelling that stays close to everyday experience. Today, we're looking at something quiet but persistent, a pattern that does not fade with time and often hides behind normal life, where a person carries something for years, not because the situation continues, but because the feeling inside it never changes. This is not about anger in the moment or conflict that is still active. It is about something that stays in place long after everything else has moved on, where the past does not feel like the past, and certain moments still feel present in a way that is hard to explain. And as you listen, you may start to notice that this is not just someone else's story, but something that may exist in smaller ways inside your own life. It usually starts in a simple moment, nothing dramatic, just a conversation that shifts slightly when someone brings up something that happened years ago. Maybe a comment, maybe a decision, maybe something small that most people would not even remember clearly anymore. The people around them react in a normal way. They nod. They try to recall the situation. Some of them barely remember the details. Others remember just enough to move past it. And the tone stays light, almost casual, as if the moment belongs fully to the past. But for one person in that conversation, something changes. Not on the surface, not in a way that immediately draws attention, but internally, where the reaction is sharper, more precise, and more present than it should be for something that is already over. They remember exactly what was said, how it was said, what the room felt like, the tone, the timing, the pause before the words, and even the feeling in their chest at that exact moment, as if the memory has not faded at all, but has been kept intact somewhere inside them. When they respond, it may sound controlled, even calm, but there is a weight behind it that does not match the situation, as if they are not just recalling something, but stepping back into it, feeling it again in real time rather than remembering it as something finished. The conversation may move on quickly, because for everyone else, it is just a reference point, a detail from the past, something that has already been processed and placed somewhere behind them. But for this person, it does not move on in the same way. Inside, the moment stays open, not fully resolved, not fully understood, and not fully released. And even after the conversation ends, it continues quietly, replaying in a way that feels automatic rather than intentional. Later, when they are alone, the memory returns again, not because they chose to think about it, but because it is still active in some way. And when it comes back, it brings the same emotional response, not weaker, not distant, but almost identical to the original experience. It is not just about one event either, because over time, more moments begin to gather in the same way. Different situations, different people, different contexts, but the same internal pattern where something happens, and instead of closing, it remains open. In friendships, it might be a comment that felt dismissive, something small that stayed longer than expected. And even when the friendship continues, that moment does not fully disappear, but becomes part of how they now see the other person. In family, it might be something said years ago, something that was never addressed directly. And even if the relationship seems stable on the surface, that one moment still holds a place inside them that has not shifted. In relationships, it can become even more visible because small misunderstandings do not just pass. They settle, they stay, and over time they begin to shape how trust is felt and how closeness is experienced. From the outside, nothing looks extreme. There are no constant arguments, no visible conflict, no clear signs that something is wrong. But underneath, there is a growing sense that certain things never really end. They just remain in place. And if you were to ask them directly, they might not describe it as holding on or refusing to forgive, because to them, it does not feel like a choice. It feels like something unfinished, something that never reached a point where it could actually be left behind. At a certain point, the pattern becomes so familiar that it no longer feels unusual. It simply becomes the way they experience certain moments, where the past does not fully settle, and the line between what happened and what is still being felt becomes less clear over time. What begins as a single moment slowly reveals itself as a pattern, because it does not stay isolated. It repeats in different situations with different people, but follows the same internal structure where something happens, and instead of fading, it remains active in a way that feels ongoing. One of the clearest signs is how memory works for them, because while most people lose detail over time, their memory holds on to specific moments with unusual clarity. Not just the facts, but the tone, the expression, the exact wording, and even the emotional atmosphere that surrounded the event. This kind of memory does not behave like a normal recollection that softens with time. Instead, it stays sharp, almost preserved, and when it returns, it does not feel like something being remembered. It feels like something being re-entered, as if the distance between past and present has collapsed. Along with this comes emotional replay, where the feeling attached to the event returns at nearly the same intensity, not reduced, not filtered, but intact, which means that even a small trigger, a similar tone of voice, a familiar situation, or even a passing thought can bring the entire experience back into the present. Because of this, even minor situations can begin to carry more weight than expected, since they are not processed as isolated moments, but become linked to previous ones, creating a chain where each new experience connects to something that was never fully resolved. In friendships, this might appear as remembering a single comment that felt dismissive or inconsiderate. And even if the relationship continues normally, that moment quietly influences how trust is felt, how safe it is to open up, and how much distance is kept without being openly acknowledged. In family dynamics, it can become even more subtle, because certain things are rarely discussed directly, but still remain present, shaping how interactions unfold, where one unresolved moment from years ago continues to affect how words are interpreted and how intentions are perceived. In romantic relationships, the pattern tends to intensify, because closeness increases sensitivity, and small misunderstandings do not simply pass through. They stay, they accumulate, and over time they begin to form a background layer that changes how every new interaction is experienced. What makes this pattern difficult to notice is that each individual moment seems small, almost insignificant on its own. But the accumulation creates something much larger, where the emotional weight does not come from one event, but from many that were never fully released. Over time, this leads to a quiet buildup of resentment, not always expressed openly, not always visible from the outside, but present internally as a growing sense that something has been carried for too long without resolution. This accumulation does not explode all at once. Instead, it spreads slowly across different areas of life, affecting how people are seen, how situations are interpreted, and how quickly trust can shift from stable to uncertain based on something that may not even be clearly stated. Because the pattern repeats, it begins to shape expectations, where the person no longer approaches new situations neutrally, but carries an underlying assumption that similar things will happen again, even if the context is different and the people involved are not the same. At this point, the past is no longer just something that happened. It becomes a reference system, a lens through which current experiences are filtered, making it difficult to separate what is actually happening now from what has already been experienced before. This creates a loop where the more the pattern repeats, the more it reinforces itself, because each new moment that feels similar confirms the expectation, and each confirmation makes it harder to see the situation independently. Even when the person is aware of this pattern on some level, it does not easily change, because the reactions feel justified, the memories feel accurate, and the emotional responses feel real, which makes it difficult to question whether the pattern itself is shaping the experience. Over a longer period, relationships begin to reflect this internal structure, not through obvious conflict, but through small shifts, slightly more distance, slightly less openness, slightly more caution, all of which build gradually without a clear starting point. People around them may sense that something is being held, even if it is not expressed directly, and this can create a subtle tension where interactions remain polite and functional, but lack a sense of ease that usually comes from things being fully resolved. Eventually, the pattern becomes so consistent that it no longer feels like a series of reactions. It feels like part of who they are, a way of experiencing the world where certain moments do not pass through but stay, and where letting go does not feel natural, but almost impossible without losing something important. At a certain point, the pattern stops feeling like a series of reactions and starts to feel like a constant internal pressure, because the person is no longer just remembering or reacting. They are carrying something that does not settle, something that remains active even when nothing is happening on the outside. There is a clear contradiction inside this experience, because on one level, they want peace. They want things to feel lighter. They want to move forward without the weight of past moments shaping every interaction. But on another level, letting go does not feel simple or even possible. The difficulty is not just emotional, it is tied to meaning. Because the moment they consider releasing something, another thought appears almost immediately, that if they let it go, then what happened might seem smaller than it actually was. Or worse, it might feel like it did not matter at all. This creates a quiet but persistent question inside them, where holding on feels like the only way to protect the significance of what they experienced, as if the memory and the emotional weight attached to it are the only proof that it was real and important. Because of this, letting go starts to feel like a form of loss. Not a release, but a kind of erasure, where the past is not just being left behind, but being reduced or dismissed in a way that feels unfair to their own experience. At the same time, holding on has its own cost, and this cost becomes more visible over time, because the accumulation of unresolved moments begins to affect how they move through life, how they relate to people, and how they interpret new situations. They may notice that they are more cautious than before, more alert to small changes in tone or behavior, and more likely to interpret neutral situations through the lens of past experiences that never fully settled. This creates a kind of internal tension that does not resolve itself, where part of them wants to relax, to trust, to stop carrying everything forward, but another part remains focused on what has not been resolved, as if it is still waiting for something that never arrived. The longer this continues, the more it begins to shape their sense of identity, not in an obvious way, but in how they understand themselves, where they may start to see themselves as someone who remembers, someone who does not overlook things, someone who does not ignore what happened. On the surface, this can feel like strength, like clarity, like a refusal to accept something that was not right. But underneath, it also creates a position that is difficult to step out of because it becomes part of how they define their own perspective. If they were to fully release these moments, it would not just change how they feel, it might also change how they see themselves. And this adds another layer of resistance, because identity is not something people let go of easily. There is also a deeper uncertainty that sits beneath all of this, where they may not fully trust that letting go will actually bring relief. Because if the pattern has been there for so long, it becomes hard to imagine what it would feel like to not carry it. So the tension remains, not as a dramatic conflict, but as a steady, ongoing state, where the desire for peace exists alongside the inability to release, and where both sides feel equally valid and equally difficult to resolve. In this space, nothing fully moves forward, but nothing fully ends either, and the person finds themselves living in between, where the past is not gone, the present is not fully free, and the question of what to do with what they carry remains unanswered. Up to this point, everything can still be understood within a familiar frame, where a person holds on because something affected them deeply and was never fully resolved. But this explanation, while accurate on the surface, does not fully explain why the emotional position stays so fixed over long periods of time. In the work of Edgar Cayce, patterns like this are often approached from a different angle, not to replace psychological understanding, but to extend it by asking a question that is usually not considered, which is whether the emotional response is only connected to this one lifetime or part of a longer pattern of experience. From this perspective, the focus shifts slightly, because instead of looking only at what was done to the person, it begins to explore how the person relates to the idea of harm itself, how they understand it, how they respond to it, and why certain experiences seem to remain open instead of closing naturally over time. One possibility that appears in Cayce's readings is that some emotional patterns are not formed in a single moment, but are carried across different contexts, where a person may have experienced similar situations from different positions, sometimes as the one who was hurt, and at other times as the one who caused harm without fully understanding the impact. This is not presented as a direct claim or something that must be believed, but as a way to look at the pattern from another angle, where the intensity of the reaction may not come only from what happened in this life, but also from something unresolved in how the person processes responsibility, impact, and emotional consequence. When seen this way, the inability to forgive is no longer just about holding on to a specific event. It may also reflect a deeper tension around understanding harm itself, where the person is not only reacting to what was done to them, but also holding an unresolved relationship with the idea of causing or receiving pain. In some interpretations, this can mean that the emotional position remains fixed because it is trying to reach a kind of balance or understanding that has not been completed, where the person stays inside the experience, not because they choose to, but because something in that experience has not yet been fully processed at a deeper level. This does not reduce the validity of what they felt or what they experienced, and it does not suggest that their reaction is incorrect. Instead, it introduces the possibility that the pattern is part of a larger process that is still incomplete, where the emotional loop continues because something within it is still active. From this angle, the question begins to change, because instead of asking only why they cannot let go, it starts to ask what is still unresolved in their understanding of the situation, what has not been integrated, and what part of the experience still holds meaning that has not yet been fully recognized. It also opens up the idea that forgiveness, in this context, is not simply about releasing the other person or dismissing what happened, but about reaching a point where the experience no longer needs to be held in the same way, because its meaning has been understood more completely. If part of the pattern involves unresolved roles, where a person has not fully processed both sides of harm, then holding on to the experience may feel necessary, because it keeps the situation active, as if it is still waiting for something that was never concluded. This can explain why time alone does not change the emotional position, because the issue is not just time passing, but understanding developing. And without that shift in understanding, the experience remains open regardless of how many years have gone by. It also helps explain why the reaction feels so stable and consistent, because it is not just tied to one event, but connected to a deeper structure that does not easily shift without a change in how the experience itself is interpreted. At the same time, this perspective does not remove personal agency, because even if the pattern has deeper roots, the way it is engaged with in the present still matters, and awareness of the pattern creates a point where something new can begin to happen. Instead of being fully inside the experience, the person can start to observe it, to see how it repeats, how it maintains itself, and how it shapes their reactions. And this shift, while small at first, creates a space where the pattern is no longer completely automatic. In that space, the idea of forgiveness begins to change, because it is no longer about forcing a release or denying the past, but about understanding the pattern well enough that it no longer needs to be held in the same way, where the emotional position can begin to move, not by pressure, but by clarity. This reframing does not solve everything immediately, and it does not remove the emotional weight all at once, but it changes the direction of the question, from why something cannot be released, to what is still being held, and why it has remained unresolved for so long. And once that question becomes clear, the pattern is no longer just something that happens. It becomes something that can be seen, and once it can be seen, it is no longer fixed in the same way it was before. When this pattern is observed beyond a single individual, it becomes clear that it is not rare or unusual, because many people carry a similar structure in different forms, where something from the past remains active long after the situation has ended, and continues to shape how they experience the present. The details may change from person to person, but the underlying process stays consistent, where an event is not fully released, and instead becomes part of an internal reference system that influences perception, reaction, and expectation in subtle but persistent ways. Some people experience this through obvious emotional recall, where memories feel vivid and immediate, while others experience it more quietly, through a general sense of tension, distance, or hesitation that appears in certain situations without a clear, conscious link to the past. In one case, it may look like someone who cannot forget a specific moment, while in another, it may look like someone who avoids certain types of conversations or relationships without fully knowing why. But in both cases, the pattern follows the same structure of something unresolved continuing to influence current experience. Across different personalities, the expression of this pattern can vary, because some people hold it internally and rarely speak about it, while others express it more openly through repeated references to past events. But the internal position remains similar, where the experience has not been fully closed. In more reserved individuals, the pattern may show up as quiet withdrawal, where they remain polite and functional, but gradually reduce how much they share, how much they trust, and how much they allow themselves to be affected by others. In more expressive individuals, it may appear as repeated return to the same topics, where certain events are brought up again and again, not out of intention to create conflict, but because the experience still feels active and unresolved inside them. Over time, this creates a form of emotional fixation, where certain moments become central points in how a person understands their life. Not because those moments were the only important ones, but because they were never fully processed and therefore never moved into the background. This fixation can slowly shape identity, where a person begins to define themselves through what they have experienced and what they have carried, seeing themselves as someone who has been affected in specific ways and organizing their understanding of life around those experiences. Once identity becomes connected to these moments, the pattern becomes more stable, because releasing the emotional weight is no longer just about changing a feeling. It begins to feel like changing a part of who they are, which creates resistance even if that resistance is not fully conscious. At a broader level, this pattern can also be seen in how people interpret new situations, because when something unresolved exists, it often becomes a filter, where current experiences are compared, consciously or unconsciously, to past ones that were never fully settled. This means that even when a situation is different, it may still be experienced as similar, because the internal reference point remains active, shaping how meaning is assigned and how quickly conclusions are formed. In this way, the pattern extends beyond memory and becomes part of perception itself, influencing not just what is remembered, but how new experiences are understood in real time. It also explains why the pattern can continue even when circumstances change, because the external situation may improve, relationships may shift, and environments may become more stable, but the internal structure remains in place unless something within it changes. When viewed across many people, this creates a clearer picture, where the pattern is not defined by one specific event or one specific type of relationship, but by a way of holding experience that keeps certain moments active instead of allowing them to settle. This broader view also removes some of the sense that the experience is unique or isolated, because it shows that the same process appears in different lives, under different conditions, with different levels of intensity, but following the same underlying structure. At this point, the focus naturally begins to move away from the details of individual events and toward the pattern itself, because it becomes clear that understanding the pattern offers more clarity than analyzing each situation separately. And once the pattern is seen in this wider context, it becomes easier to recognize that what feels deeply personal is also part of a larger human tendency, where unresolved experiences continue to shape how life is felt until something within that process begins to shift. When this pattern is translated into modern psychological terms, it becomes easier to see how it operates without needing to rely on abstract ideas, because there are well-documented processes that explain why certain experiences remain active instead of fading over time. One of the clearest parallels is what is often described as a trauma loop, where an experience is not fully processed at the time it happens, and instead of being integrated and stored as a completed memory, it remains partially open, which allows it to be reactivated again and again under similar conditions. In this state, the brain does not treat the event as something that is fully in the past, but as something that still carries relevance, which is why even small triggers can bring back not just the memory, but the emotional and physical response associated with it. This explains why the person does not feel like they are remembering in a distant way, because from a neurological perspective, the experience is being reactivated in a way that resembles the original state, rather than being recalled as a neutral piece of information. Another important concept is emotional memory, where the body and mind store not just what happened, but how it felt. And this type of memory can remain stable even when the conscious mind tries to move on, creating a gap between what a person thinks they should feel and what they actually feel when the memory returns. Because emotional memory is not always processed through deliberate thinking, it can remain unchanged unless it is addressed directly, which means that time alone does not guarantee resolution, and experiences can stay active for years if they are not fully integrated. There is also the role of subconscious reinforcement, where repeated attention to a particular memory strengthens its presence. Not because the person is choosing to hold on to it, but because each time it is revisited, the neural pathway associated with it becomes more established. This creates a feedback loop, where the more the memory is activated, the easier it becomes to activate again, which explains why certain moments feel increasingly present over time instead of gradually fading. Another layer of this pattern can be understood through attachment and identity, where a person begins to connect their sense of self to specific experiences, especially those that had a strong emotional impact, which makes those experiences more difficult to release because they are no longer just memories, but part of how the person understands themselves. When identity becomes linked to unresolved events, letting go can feel like losing a part of one's personal narrative, which creates resistance even if the person is aware that holding on is not helping them move forward. There is also a cognitive aspect, where the mind tries to maintain consistency, meaning that once a conclusion has been formed about an event, such as what it meant or what it says about other people, the mind tends to preserve that interpretation unless something actively challenges it. This means that the pattern is not only emotional, but also interpretive, where the same framework is applied to new situations, reinforcing the original conclusion and making it harder to see alternative perspectives. In this way, the pattern becomes self-sustaining because emotional memory, neural reinforcement, identity attachment, and cognitive consistency all work together to keep the experience active, even when the external situation has changed. What makes this especially difficult is that all of these processes are normal functions of the mind. They are not errors or failures, but mechanisms designed to protect, organize, and make sense of experience, which means that the pattern is not something unnatural, but something that has become extended beyond its original purpose. When these mechanisms are working in balance, they help a person learn from experience and move forward. But when an experience is not fully processed, the same mechanisms can keep it active, creating a loop that continues without resolution. Understanding this does not immediately remove the pattern, but it changes how it is seen, because instead of feeling like something that should have disappeared but did not, it becomes something that follows a clear internal logic, even if that logic leads to a state that feels limiting. This shift in understanding is important because it reduces the sense of confusion and replaces it with clarity, where the person can begin to see that what they are experiencing is not random, but structured, and that structure can be observed and gradually changed. At this point, the idea of forgiveness can also be reinterpreted in psychological terms, not as a moral decision or a forced action, but as a process of allowing the memory to move from an active state to an integrated one, where it no longer triggers the same level of emotional response. Seen this way, forgiveness is less about what is done to the past and more about what changes in the present, where the experience no longer needs to be held in the same way because it has been processed differently. And when that shift begins, even slightly, the pattern that once felt fixed starts to show signs of movement. Not because it was pushed away, but because it no longer needs to stay active in order to maintain its place in the person's experience. At this point, the pattern becomes clear enough to allow a different kind of understanding, not just of what is happening, but of what it actually means to hold on, and what it would mean to release without losing anything important. The key shift begins with a simple but often misunderstood idea, which is that forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and it is not the same as saying that what happened was acceptable or insignificant, because those interpretations are what make letting go feel like a form of denial. In reality, forgiveness operates in a different way, because it is not about removing the event from memory or changing its meaning, but about changing the position from which the event is experienced, where it no longer feels like something that is still happening in the present. When a person holds on to an experience, what they are often preserving is not just the memory, but the state of being inside that moment, where the emotional response continues as if the situation has not fully ended, even though it has already passed in time. From this perspective, the act of holding on does not protect the importance of the event. It keeps the person connected to it in a way that prevents it from becoming part of a completed past, which means that the experience continues to influence the present more than it needs to. This is where the core insight begins to take shape, because releasing something does not mean losing its meaning. It means allowing it to exist as something that has already happened, rather than something that is still actively shaping how each new moment is felt. In other words, forgiveness is not about the past at all. It is about the present, about whether the person is still positioned inside the event or has stepped outside of it, where the memory remains, but the emotional state attached to it no longer controls their current experience. This also addresses the fear that letting go will make the experience feel unimportant, because the importance of an event is not determined by how long it is held onto, but by how clearly it is understood and integrated into the broader context of a person's life. When something is fully understood, it does not need to be repeated or revisited in the same way, because its meaning has already been established, and this allows it to settle naturally without being pushed away or forced into silence. What often keeps the pattern in place is not the strength of the event itself, but the belief that holding on is necessary in order to preserve truth. But in reality, truth does not depend on continuous emotional activation. It remains even when the emotional intensity changes. This means that letting go is not a form of loss, but a change in how the experience is carried, where it moves from something that is actively lived to something that is clearly understood. And this shift reduces the need for the pattern to repeat itself. At the same time, this is not something that happens instantly, because the pattern has been reinforced over time, and changing it requires a gradual shift in awareness, where the person begins to notice when they are stepping back into the event, and slowly creates space between the memory and the present moment. As that space grows, even slightly, the experience begins to change. Not because it disappears, but because it no longer defines the emotional state in the same way. And this is the point where movement becomes possible after a long period of stillness. At this point, it becomes less about analyzing the pattern and more about noticing it in your own life. Not in a dramatic way, but in small, quiet moments where something feels more present than it should be for something that already happened. You might start to recognize certain memories that do not feel like memories at all, but like something you can step back into almost instantly, where the emotion returns without effort and the sense of time between then and now becomes less clear. You may also notice situations where your reaction feels stronger than the moment itself, where something small seems to carry more weight than it logically should. And when you look closer, it connects to something that was never fully resolved. There may be people in your life where your response is shaped not only by what is happening now, but by something that happened before, something that still holds a position inside you that has not shifted, even if you rarely think about it directly. And if you follow that pattern carefully, you may begin to see that the question is not simply why you feel this way, but where you are positioned in relation to the experience, whether you are remembering it from a distance or still standing inside it without realizing it. From there, a quieter question begins to form, one that does not require an immediate answer, but invites you to look more honestly at what you are carrying and how it continues to shape your present experience. If something in your life feels like it cannot be forgiven, is it because the event itself is still unresolved? Or is it because part of you is still living inside that moment, holding its position as if it has not yet ended? And if that is the case, what would it mean not to erase it or deny it, but simply to step outside of it, even slightly, and allow it to become something that has already happened instead of something you are still experiencing? If this perspective connected with you in any way, take a moment to notice which part felt the most familiar, because that is often where the pattern is easiest to see when you begin to look at it more closely in your own life. If something in this video still feels unclear or incomplete, you can leave a comment and share what part you want to understand better, because sometimes the questions themselves are where the next layer of clarity begins. And if there is a specific topic or pattern you want to explore next, write it down below, because many of the videos on Edgar Cayce narratives are built directly from the experiences and questions that come from you. If you found this useful, you can support the channel by liking the video and subscribing, so you do not miss the next exploration of patterns that often stay hidden but quietly shape how we experience life.